In the galaxy, there were many species, each with their own strengths, weaknesses, and ways of life. But among them, there was one that stood out, one that was feared by almost every other race, the Drakra. These beings had the kind of reputation that made even the bravest warriors hesitate before facing them. Their bodies were large, covered in thick, scaly armor that was nearly impossible to penetrate. Their claws were sharp enough to tear through steel, and their eyes glowed with an intensity that struck fear into the hearts of those who dared to look into them. To the rest of the galaxy, the Drakra were not just powerful, they were terrifying. Princess Nira of the Valtari Dominion had heard the stories. From a young age, she had been taught to fear the Drakra, to see them as the enemy that could never be defeated. Her father, the Emperor, had told her countless tales of their bloodthirsty raids and their unyielding desire to conquer. Entire worlds had been swallowed up by their ruthless war machines, their people enslaved or wiped out in the blink of an eye. The Drakra were monsters. Everyone knew that, and everyone feared them. But Nira had always felt a certain unease with the stories. She was raised as a leader, strong in both mind and spirit, but even she could not shake the fear that lingered in her heart when she thought of the Drakra. She had never seen one in person, but the thought of facing them in battle filled her with dread. What if the stories were true? What if the Drakra were as dangerous as everyone said? Her father, Emperor Zalran, had spent years preparing for the inevitable war with the Drakra. The Valtari Dominion was vast, with powerful fleets and advanced technology, but even they were not sure how long they could stand against such an unstoppable force. Nira knew that war was coming. It was only a matter of time, and when it did, the Valtari would have to fight with everything they had. But on that particular day, something unexpected happened. Nira was standing in the grand hall of the palace, watching as reports from the royal military arrived. Her father, as usual, was busy in the throne room with his advisors, planning the defense of the empire. The palace was silent, except for the occasional footsteps of guards or the soft rustle of paper as reports were passed around. It was a place of power, a place where decisions were made that could change the course of history. And yet, there was a tension in the air, a feeling that something was about to happen that would shake the galaxy to its core. A messenger burst into the hall, his face pale with fear. "Princess Nira," he gasped, bowing before her. "The Drakra, they are coming." The words sent a shiver down her spine. The Drakra, her people's greatest enemy, were coming to the borders of the Valtari Dominion. The time had arrived. "What do we know about them?" Nira asked, her voice steady despite the storm of thoughts racing through her mind. The messenger looked down at the report in his hands. "They have sent a fleet, massive warships. There are no signs of aggression yet, but they are closing in fast. Our fleet is being put on high alert." Nira nodded, her mind already working. She knew the stories. The Drakra never gave warnings. They came, they conquered, and they destroyed. This was different. This time, they were waiting. What were they planning? Why weren't they attacking immediately? "I will speak with my father," Nira said. "Gather the commanders. We need to prepare for the worst." As she walked down the long corridors of the palace, her mind was racing. She had always believed that the Drakra were monsters, savage creatures who would stop at nothing to destroy. But this situation was different. The enemy wasn't attacking right away. They were waiting, and Nira couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this than met the eye. When she entered the throne room, the atmosphere was heavy with tension. Her father, Emperor Zalran, stood at the center of the room, his sharp eyes scanning the reports in front of him. The rest of the council members were gathered around him, discussing their next move. "Father," Nira said, stepping forward, "what do we know about the Drakra fleet?" Emperor Zalran turned to face his daughter. His face was stern, but there was a flicker of worry in his eyes, something Nira had never seen before. He held up a data pad showing the image of the Drakra fleet. It was enormous, far larger than anything the Valtari had ever faced. "They are massive," the Emperor said, his voice low. "Their ships are unlike anything we've seen before. We've been preparing for this day for years, but I fear our forces may not be enough. We have to make a decision. Do we engage them now, or wait and see what they do?" Nira took a deep breath, her mind working quickly. She knew her father's strategy. He was a warrior, just like the rest of the Valtari, and he believed in strength, above all else. But Nira wasn't so sure. The Drakra were supposed to be ruthless, but what if they weren't the monsters everyone thought they were? What if the truth was something more complicated, something that could change everything? "I think we should wait," she said carefully. "There's something strange about this. The Drakra are not acting like we've been told. They're waiting. We need to understand why." Her father raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by her suggestion. "Wait! You want us to wait? We can't afford to wait, Nira. If they attack, we need to be ready." "I know," she said. "But what if they're not here to attack? What if they want something else?" Her father's expression softened for a moment, but only for a moment. "You're brave to think that, my daughter, but we must prepare for war." "I know," Nira said again, her voice steady, "but I will not be a part of a war that we don't understand." The Emperor sighed, then nodded. "Very well. We'll give it a little time, but I will not wait long. We will be ready." As Nira left the throne room, her thoughts were filled with questions. The Drakra, were they really as dangerous as everyone believed? Or was there something else at play here? Something she couldn't yet understand? The galaxy's most frightening species had arrived, but Nira couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was not what she had been told. And soon, she would have to find out what that truth really was. The day had come. The Drakra fleet was now within the borders of the Valtari dominion, and Princess Nira could feel the tension in the air. Her father, Emperor Zalran, had already prepared their military forces for a fight, but Nira wasn't sure what to expect. The stories told of the Drakra's ruthless attacks, their ships dark and intimidating, and their warriors bloodthirsty. But none of that had come yet. Instead, the Drakra ships hovered at the edge of the Valtari space, their enormous forms silent, waiting. Nira stood in the observation deck of the palace, staring out at the vastness of space. The stars glittered against the backdrop of endless blackness, and her thoughts raced. What were the Drakra waiting for? If they had come to destroy the Valtari, why hadn't they attacked already? It didn't make sense. The princess had prepared herself for the worst, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was different this time. The palace was buzzing with activity as news of the Drakra fleet spread. Soldiers were readying their weapons, the royal fleet was on high alert, and the advisors were meeting in the war room discussing their strategy. The whole of the Valtari dominion seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the next move. As Nira made her way to the war room, she couldn't ignore the unease that gnawed at her. Everyone around her was speaking of battle plans, of sending out their ships to confront the Drakra. But Nira couldn't shake the thought that rushing into a fight might not be the best answer. There had to be more to this situation than simple aggression. She entered the war room, where her father and his advisors were already gathered around a large, holographic display of the Drakra fleet. The ships loomed on the map, their massive sizes dwarfing the Valtari ships in comparison. "What's the latest?" Nira asked, stepping into the room. Her father, looking even more serious than usual, turned toward her. "We're ready," he said simply. "Our fleet is in position. We'll confront them head-on and force them to surrender. If they refuse, we'll destroy them." "But father," Nira began, her voice calm but insistent. "What if they're not here to attack us? What if they're waiting for something?" The room fell silent. Emperor Zalran's eyes narrowed as he turned to his daughter. Nira, the Drakra have always attacked first. They're here because they want something. We don't have time to wait. If we hesitate, we could lose everything. I understand that, Nira said. But what if they're not our enemies? We don't know what they want yet. We need to understand their intentions before we make a move. Nira, one of the senior advisors, spoke up. The Drakra don't negotiate. They destroy. Every time they've come to a new planet, they've left it in ruins. We can't afford to take that chance. Nira shook her head. I'm not suggesting we do nothing, but we have to approach this carefully. If we rush into a battle, we might make things worse. Maybe the Drakra are just misunderstood. Her father sighed and turned back to the holographic display. I know you mean well, but we cannot risk the future of the Valtari Dominion on uncertainty. I will not sit back and let the Drakra take what's ours. Nira knew her father was right to be concerned, but her gut told her that there was something different about this situation. She had to find out more. With the war room still in heated discussion, Nira made a decision. I'm going to speak with them, she said, her voice firm. Her father's eyes widened. What? Nira, you can't be serious. You want to approach the Drakra directly? Yes, Nira replied. I want to understand what they want. I'll go in peace. But I need to know what's going on before we make any rash decisions. Emperor Zalran opened his mouth to protest, but Nira was already turning to leave. I'll be careful, she said, before disappearing down the corridor. Outside, the war room. Nira walked briskly to the hangar, where a small shuttle was being prepped for her mission. The vessel was sleek, designed for speed and stealth, with just enough firepower to defend itself if needed. The plan was simple. Approach the Drakra flagship, send a message, and hopefully open a dialogue. But Nira knew that there was always a risk when dealing with a species as unpredictable as the Drakra. As the shuttle lifted off from the palace and entered the vacuum of space, Nira gazed out of the window. The Drakra fleet was immense, its ships resembling giant, menacing shadows against the backdrop of stars. They were a force to be reckoned with, that much was clear. But Nira still couldn't understand why they weren't attacking. What were they waiting for? The journey to the Drakra flagship felt like an eternity. The cold, silent void of space surrounded her, and Nira's thoughts continued to race. She reviewed every piece of information she had ever been told about the Drakra. They were violent. They were destructive. They were a species without mercy. But none of that fit with the silence she had witnessed so far. They had come to the Valtari borders, but they hadn't made a move. The shuttle finally reached the Drakra flagship, and Nira transmitted her request for a meeting. Her heart pounded in her chest as she awaited a response. The minutes dragged on, and she wondered if her mission would be in vain. Would the Drakra respond with aggression, or would they grant her the opportunity to speak? Suddenly, the communication line flickered to life. A voice, deep and gravelly, crackled over. The speaker. You wish to speak with us, Princess Nira of the Valtari Dominion? Nira's heart skipped a beat. Yes, she said, her voice steady. I come in peace to understand your intentions. There was a long pause before the voice responded. Very well. We will grant you an audience. Approach with caution. Nira's pulse quickened as the shuttle moved toward the massive doors of the Drakra flagship. She had made it this far, but what would she find within? Would the Drakra really be willing to talk, or was this all a trap? With one final deep breath, Nira prepared herself for whatever came next. The truth was just beyond the massive doors, and she was determined to uncover it. Princess Nira's heart raced as her shuttle neared the enormous Drakra flagship. The immense dark hull of the ship loomed in front of her, its size making her own vessel feel like a speck in the vastness of space. The Drakra's reputation as a fearsome, unyielding species had been burned into her mind since childhood, but now she was face to face with their home. The anticipation of what would happen next made the silence of space feel even heavier. Nira's fingers brushed against the console of her shuttle, her nerves threatening to overtake her calm exterior. She had always believed that the Drakra were nothing more than vicious conquerors. That's what the stories had taught her. They destroyed worlds, left nothing behind but ash and ruins. But her gut told her that what she was about to witness might change everything. The communication line buzzed to life, and a deep, gravelly voice spoke through the speaker. "Princess Nira of the Valtari Dominion, you have requested to speak with us." "I have," Nira replied, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "I come in peace. I wish to understand your intentions." There was a long pause before the voice responded again. "We shall grant you an audience, but come no closer without caution. Enter the docking bay." The shuttle followed the instructions, its engines humming gently as it moved toward a large open bay on the Drakra flagship. Nira held her breath as she steered the shuttle in, the doors of the bay slowly opening to welcome her in. The sheer scale of the ship was overwhelming. As she set the shuttle down on the landing pad, she could feel the power of the Drakra presence. Her whole body seemed to vibrate with the raw energy of the ship. The rumors of their strength weren't exaggerated. When the shuttle landed, Nira paused before exiting. She had no idea what would await her beyond the doors. Stepping into the unknown wasn't easy, but she had to know the truth. She had to meet the Drakra face to face to understand what they truly wanted. The ramp of the shuttle lowered, and Nira walked out cautiously, her eyes scanning the dark surroundings. The interior of the Drakra flagship was nothing like what she had expected. Instead of the cold, intimidating design she had imagined, there was a sense of quiet strength here. The walls were lined with intricate ancient symbols, and the air felt thick with history. Everything seemed ancient. Before Nira could take another step, a figure stepped forward. The Drakra warrior was unlike anything she had imagined. He was tall, his body cloaked in dark armor that seemed to absorb the light around him. His face was partially obscured by a helmet, but his eyes, deep, calculating, and full of purpose, stared directly into hers. The sight of him sent a chill down her spine, but not the fear she had expected. There was something different about him. Something that made her question everything she had been taught. "You are Princess Nira." The warrior's voice was low but clear. "I am Raylock, of the Drakra Peace Faction. You have come to speak with us." Nira's eyes widened slightly at the mention of the Peace Faction. Peace? She had never heard of such a thing. The Drakra had always been described as bloodthirsty conquerors, not peacekeepers. "Yes, I have," she said cautiously. "I came to understand why you've arrived at the borders of my empire and what it is you seek." Ralak regarded her silently for a moment, his piercing gaze unblinking. Then, with a slow motion, he removed his helmet, revealing a face that was startlingly different from the monstrous image Nira had expected. His features were sharp, yet dignified, and though his skin was covered in scales, it was not the grotesque appearance she had imagined. His expression was serious, yet there was a glimmer of something else in his eyes, something that hinted at intelligence and even sorrow. "We have not come to destroy," Ralak said, his voice carrying a weight of truth. "We have come to survive." Nira blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "Survive? But the stories say you are monsters, yes?" Raylock interrupted gently. "That is what the galaxy believes, and we have let the myths spread. The truth is far more complicated. You see, the Drakra are not a single entity. We have been torn apart by war, by those who sought power, and by the false stories that the galaxy believes. The faction you know, The one that attacked your people's ancestors is not the whole of us. They are only a small part of what the Drakra once were. Nira's mind struggled to process his words. So, what are you telling me? That the Drakra we feared for generations aren't the real Drakra? Ralok's eyes softened. Yes, the Drakra you know are the result of a rogue faction, a group that overthrew the old government and sought to conquer. The rest of us have been fighting to survive, hiding from our own kind, struggling to hold on to what was once ours. Nira shook her head in disbelief. The Drakra she had been taught to fear were not what they seemed. The truth was so different from the stories she had heard. But why now? Why come to the Valtari Dominion? What do you want? We want peace, Ralok said simply. We have been fighting our own kind for so long that we can no longer afford to be enemies with the galaxy. We want to rebuild our people, but we need help. That is why we are here. We came to you, Princess Nira, because we believe that the Valtari can help us. We do not seek war. We only want to survive. Nira's heart pounded as she processed his words. The galaxy's most feared species had not come for conquest, but for something entirely different. The Drakra were not the monsters of legend. They were a species on the brink of extinction, and they had come to her for help. Nira stood silent for a long moment, weighing the enormity of what she had just learned. The decision she faced was unlike any she had ever encountered. Her people had been taught to fear the Drakra, to destroy them if necessary. But now, standing before Ralok, she realized that the true enemy might not be the Drakra at all. It might be the lies that had kept them in conflict for centuries. Finally, Nira spoke, her voice resolute. If what you say is true, then we must find a way to help. But the rest of my people, they won't believe this without proof. We understand, Ralok said with a nod, and we will show you the truth. The moment had come. The truth of the Drakra was unfolding, and the galaxy's understanding of them would never be the same. Princess Nira stood in the heart of the Drakra flagship, her mind racing with the weight of the conversation she had just had. The truth was a far cry from the nightmares she had been taught to expect. The Drakra were not the monsters the galaxy had always feared. Instead, they were a species on the edge of extinction, a peaceful faction struggling to survive. Nira felt a strange mix of disbelief and sympathy. Could it really be that the galaxy had been wrong all along? Ralok, standing before her, seemed to sense her confusion. His dark eyes, calm and steady, met hers. Despite the imposing presence of his Drakra form, there was an unmistakable gentleness in his demeanor. Nira had never imagined a Drakra warrior could be so composed, so human. I know this is difficult to understand, Princess, Ralok said, his voice low but firm. The galaxy's perception of us has been shaped by centuries of lies and misunderstandings. We've become the villains in stories that we didn't write. But now we're asking for your help. We can't do this alone. Nira nodded slowly. She could feel the weight of his words pressing down on her. This was more than just a diplomatic decision. It was a choice that could change the future of the galaxy. Helping the Drakra meant defying everything she had been taught, everything her people had prepared for. It meant risking everything. What exactly do you need from us? Nira asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling inside her. Ralok stepped forward, the sound of his heavy boots echoing in the quiet room. We need allies. The rogue faction that has caused so much destruction, they will not stop. If they succeed, they will wipe us all out, Valtari and Drakra alike. We need your fleet, your technology, your resources. Together we can stand against them. Nira considered his words. The Valtari Dominion had the strength to defend itself, but trusting the Drakra was another matter entirely. She had seen how quickly alliances could fall apart in the face of fear. Would her people accept this alliance? Could she even convince her father, Emperor Zalran, to trust the Drakra after everything they had done? "I'll need to speak with my father," Nira said quietly. "He won't agree to anything without proof." Raylock nodded. "I understand, but time is running out. The rogue faction has already begun their next campaign. If we don't act, soon we will lose everything." Nira's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but she knew she couldn't make this decision alone. She had to return to the Valtari, to her people, and face the harsh reality of what they had been taught to believe. She had to find a way to convince them, convince her father, that the Drakra were not the enemy they had always thought. After a long silence, Nira turned to Raylock. "I will return to the Valtari and speak with my father. But know this. If you have lied to me in any way, I will not hesitate to defend my people." Raylock's eyes hardened, but his voice remained steady. "I understand. You have every right to be cautious. But know that we are not your enemies. We have never wanted this war." With that, Nira returned to her shuttle, leaving the Drakra flagship behind. As she entered the cold silence of space once again, her mind raced. Could she really trust Raylock? Was it possible that the Drakra, this species so feared by all, could truly be innocent? Her heart told her that he was honest, but the weight of history, the weight of generations of conflict, could not be so easily dismissed. As her shuttle made its way back to the Valtari capital, Nira felt a deep sense of responsibility. She wasn't just speaking for herself, she was speaking for an entire empire. If she failed, if her people rejected the Drakra, the consequences could be catastrophic. She could only hope that her father would see the truth in the Drakra's words and agree to the alliance. When Nira finally arrived back at the palace, she was greeted by a mixture of concern and curiosity. The advisors were waiting for her, their faces full of questions. The moment she stepped off the shuttle, her father, Emperor Zalran, was there to meet her. "Nira," he said, his voice thick with tension. "What is the meaning of this? You've been gone for hours. Did the Drakra attack?" "No, father," Nira replied, shaking her head. "They didn't attack. In fact, they're not here to destroy us. They came to talk. The Drakra. They've been misunderstood. They're not the monsters we've been led to believe." Her father's expression darkened. "What do you mean?" "The Drakra have waged war across the galaxy for centuries. They've conquered worlds, enslaved people. You can't possibly believe that they're not a threat." Nira stood tall, her resolve hardening. "I've spoken to them. The Drakra who came to our borders are not the ones who attacked our ancestors. They're a different faction, one that wants peace, not war. They've been fighting their own kind, trying to survive. They need our help, father. They need us to join them against the rogue faction." Emperor Zalran's face flushed with anger. "You're asking me to trust the Drakra after everything they've done?" "I'm asking you to listen, father," Nira said, her voice unwavering. "The Drakra are not the enemy, the rogue faction that has caused all the destruction. They're the real threat. If we don't act together, we will all fall." The room fell silent as Nira's words sank in. The advisors exchanged uncertain glances, and her father stood still, staring at her with a mixture of disbelief and contemplation. Finally, he spoke. "If what you say is true, then we are on the edge of something far greater than we ever imagined," Emperor Zalran said slowly. "But I can't make this decision alone. We need to gather the council. We need to hear from the other leaders. If we do this, it will be a decision that will affect the fate of the entire galaxy." Nira nodded, relieved that her father was open to discussion, but she knew the road ahead would be difficult. Convincing the Valtari leadership would not be easy. There was too much history, too much fear to overcome. But she had taken the first step. She had opened their eyes to a truth they had never considered. Now it was time to fight for the future. A future where peace could be possible, even between two species who had once been enemies. The days following Princess Nira's return to the Valtari capital were filled with tension. She had made her case to her father, Emperor Zalran, and the council, but convincing them to ally with the Drakra had not been easy. Fear and distrust ran deep among the Valtari, and the idea of working with the very species they had spent generations fighting against seemed impossible. Yet, Nira's persistence had won out. After countless meetings, debates, and hours of discussion, the Valtari leadership had agreed to at least consider the Drakra's offer. The council, though still skeptical, had authorized a joint operation to take down the rogue faction that had been terrorizing both the Drakra and the galaxy. If this alliance worked, the Valtari would have a chance to finally put an end to the endless war. But Nira knew that this alliance wasn't without its risks. The Drakra, despite their peace-seeking intentions, were still a force to be reckoned with. Their reputation was not easily forgotten. Nira could sense the growing unease within the Valtari ranks. There were whispers of betrayal, of doubts that the Drakra could truly be trusted. Even among her own allies, there was fear. The day of the final battle arrived. The Drakra and the Valtari were to unite their forces and strike at the heart of the rogue faction's stronghold. The two armies would face each other in a battle that could decide the fate of the entire galaxy. The stakes could not have been higher. Nira stood in the command center of the Valtari fleet, overlooking the strategy plans that had been laid out. Her eyes scanned the holographic display, which showed the positions of both the Valtari and Drakra forces. Everything was ready, everything was in place. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Ralok, the Drakra warrior she had come to trust, stood beside her. His presence was calming, but even he seemed tense. They had both come a long way from their first meeting. What had started as cautious diplomacy had turned into a powerful partnership. Ralok had become Nira's most trusted ally, but the weight of the coming battle pressed down on them both. "This is it, isn't it?" Nira asked, her voice soft. "The final push." Ralok nodded, his face serious. "Yes. We fight not just for survival, but for our future. The rogue faction has taken everything from us. This battle will determine whether we live to rebuild or if we fade into history." Nira turned her gaze toward the large window overlooking the space battle formations. "What if we fail?" "We won't," Ralok replied firmly. "We've come this far together. Failure is not an option." But deep down, Nira knew that there were no guarantees. Even with their combined forces, there was always the possibility that things could go wrong. The rogue faction had more firepower, more soldiers, and the element of surprise on their side. It would take every bit of strength and resolve they had to defeat them. As the battle began, the skies above the Drakra stronghold erupted into chaos. Ships fired on both sides, the air filled with the sound of blasters, and the flash of explosions lit up the dark void of space. Nira watched the battle unfold, her heart pounding in her chest. She had seen war before, but never like this. The Valtari fleet fought with precision, their ships moving like a well-oiled machine. The Drakra, though not as advanced in technology, fought with a fury and passion that Nira had never seen before. In the midst of the chaos, Nira noticed something. Ralok's ship, one of the lead Drakra vessels, was taking heavy fire. His ship was surrounded by rogue faction fighters, and despite the shields holding strong, the ship was taking significant damage. Nira's stomach twisted as she watched the ship's status. Ralok was in the heart of the battle, leading his people in the front lines, and she could see that his ship was struggling to hold up. "Ralok!" Nira called over the comms, her voice laced with concern. "You need to retreat. Your ship is taking too much damage." There was a long pause before Ralok's voice came through the comms, calm as always. "I cannot retreat, Princess. The Drakra need me here. The future of my people depends on this battle." Nira's heart sank. She knew what Ralok was saying, but it didn't make it any easier. He was putting everything on the line for this, for his people, for the Alliance. "This isn't just your fight, Ralok," Nira protested. "We've worked together. I won't let you risk everything now." "I understand your concern, Nira," Ralok said, his voice softening. "But my people need to see that I'm willing to fight beside them. I can't lead them if I'm not willing to fight with them to the end." The words hit Nira like a cold wave. She understood now. Ralok wasn't just fighting for his people. He was fighting for the very idea of peace, fighting to show that the Drakra could change, that they weren't the monsters everyone thought they were. He was leading by example, giving everything to prove that the Drakra were worth saving. As the battle raged on, Nira's thoughts turned to her own people. She had never imagined that she would be fighting alongside the Drakra, let alone risking so much for their survival. But now, as she watched Ralok take on wave after wave of enemies, she knew that this wasn't just about saving a species. It was about creating a future. A future where enemies could stand together, where peace wasn't just a dream, but a possibility. The battle reached its peak. The rogue faction's flagship loomed ahead, its weapons charging for a final strike. Nira's fleet was struggling to keep up, and it seemed like defeat was near. But Ralok's ship, battered and broken, pushed forward, breaking through the rogue faction's defenses and taking down their shields. In that final moment, Ralok's voice crackled over the comms. "Once more, this is it, Princess. We end this now." With a final heroic charge, Ralok's ship took down the rogue faction's flagship, sacrificing his vessel and his life in the process. The Drakra and Valtari forces surged forward, wiping out the remaining rogue soldiers and ending the battle once and for all. As the dust settled, Nira sat in her command center, her face pale. The battle had been won, but at a great cost. Ralok had given everything for this moment, and Nira felt the weight of his sacrifice in her heart. She knew that the future they had fought for would not be easy. But it was a future they could build together, and Ralok's sacrifice would never be forgotten. The battle was over. The rogue faction had been defeated, and the Valtari Dominion and Drakra had proven that their alliance was stronger than the old prejudices that had once divided them. But even as Nira stood among her people, watching the aftermath of the victory, the weight of the loss hung heavily on her heart. Ralok, the Drakra warrior who had been her ally, her friend, had given his life to ensure their future. His sacrifice had been the turning point of the war, and yet it left a hole that Nira couldn't fill. The Valtari fleet had won the battle, but Ralok's ship, what remained of it, drifted through space, a silent testament to the price of victory. It was a reminder that peace was not easily achieved, and that it required something far greater than just strength. It required the courage to change, to believe in something better, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for it. Nira stood on the observation deck of the palace, gazing out at the stars. The dark, endless expanse of space stretched before her. But now, for the first time in her life, she didn't feel alone. She had once thought of the galaxy as a cold, unforgiving place, a place where only the strongest survived. But now she understood that there was more to it than that. There was hope, and there was a chance for something greater than war and hatred. Her father, Emperor Zalran, walked up beside her. His expression was grim, but there was a softness in his eyes now that hadn't been there before. The cost of the battle had weighed on him as well, but Nira could see the change in him. He had always been a warrior, a man of strength and power, but now he was beginning to understand that true strength came from unity, from understanding, and from the willingness to embrace the unknown. "You've done something incredible, Nira," Zalran said, his voice quiet. "You brought us to this point. You showed us that we could not live in fear of our past forever." Nira glanced at her father, her heart swelling with pride. He had been the last to truly believe in the Drakra. He had fought against her, idea of an alliance every step of the way, but in the end, he had come to see the truth. He had seen that the Drakra were not monsters, and that peace was possible, even with those who had once been enemies. "We did it together," Nira replied. "The Valtari and the Drakra. This victory belongs to both of us." Her father nodded, his eyes softening. "Yes, together. But you were the one who believed when no one else did. You saw the humanity in them. That's something I could not see." The silence between them was filled with understanding. Nira had always admired her father's strength, his wisdom. But now she saw a new kind of strength in him, one that came from his willingness to change, to admit that he had been wrong, and to embrace a future that was different from what he had once imagined. "It's not just about winning, Father," Nira said, her voice thoughtful. "It's about what we do now. We have to rebuild, and we have to do it together. The Drakra need our help, and we need theirs." Zalrin's gaze turned to the stars as well. "I never imagined this day would come. I thought the Drakra were a threat that could never be overcome. But now I see the truth. They are more like us than I ever realized." Nira smiled softly, her heart lighter than it had been in days. "They are. They've always been. And now we have the chance to show the galaxy that we can all change, that we can all choose a different path." The days that followed were filled with meetings, discussions, and the long, difficult process of rebuilding. The Valtari and Drakra worked side by side, laying the foundations for a new future. The rogue faction that had caused so much destruction was gone, but the scars it left would take time to heal. There were those who still feared the Drakra, who didn't trust them. But there were also many who had come to see the truth, who had learned that enemies could become allies, and that peace was worth fighting for. In the heart of the Drakra stronghold, Raylok's name was spoken with reverence. He had led them to victory, and though he was gone, his legacy lived on in the hearts of those who had fought beside him. His sacrifice had shown them the true meaning of leadership, not in power or conquest, but in the willingness to fight for what was right, even at the cost of one's own life. Nira visited the Drakra leaders, including Kalthor, the wise elder who had helped her understand their people. The alliance between the Valtari and Drakra was not just about military strength. It was about trust, about believing that there was more to a species than its past. The Drakra, too, were struggling to rebuild, and they needed the Valtari's help as much as the Valtari needed theirs. Together, they worked to forge a new future for their people. The old stories of war and destruction were replaced with new stories of hope and cooperation. The Drakra and Valtari began to trade, to share knowledge, and to support each other in ways they had never imagined. What had once been an enemy, Force was now a partner, working side by side with the Valtari to ensure a peaceful and prosperous future. As Nira stood with her father, watching the first signs of change take root, she couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. They had done it. Together they had created something new, something better. "We've come so far, Father," she said, her voice filled with hope. "And we have so much more to do. But I believe now, more than ever, that peace is possible, that we can build something that lasts." Zalran turned to her, a look of pride in his eyes. "You were right all along, Nira, and I am proud of you." The future was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. This was the beginning of something new. A future where old enemies could become friends, where strength was defined not by violence, but by the courage to choose peace. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was a future worth fighting for.